Let me switch things up. Let me approach this topic from the other direction, if you will. Have you ever visited a farmed animal sanctuary where they take animals that have been exploited and abused on ranches and they try to give them a better life? Well, the land at those sanctuaries has been destroyed by only a handful of these animals. You want these animals to be able to roam around. You want them to enjoy some sense of freedom in the process of giving them a better life, but in so doing, you have also subjected your habitat to domestic livestock, and the results are not good. But it's not just that only a couple of cows can decimate the entire acreage of your sanctuary and turn everything that was green and beautiful to dirt and mud. It's also the mind-blowing amount of waste that these animals produce. They eat and they eat and they eat and they poop and they poop and they poop. This presents challenges to these sanctuaries on multiple levels, dealing with all of the waste that's being produced and trying to maintain their habitat in some form. And this is all being caused by only a couple of the livestock, much less hundreds of them, much less thousands of them, which is the reality of ranching that is trying to turn a profit. Meanwhile, just outside the boundary line of those sanctuaries, outside of their private property line where the land is still wild, the habitat looks good, but there are still wild animals roaming around out there. There are hooved herbivores walking around out there, and yet that land isn't destroyed. Explain that one. Cattle have no place in these habitats. Cattle did not evolve with the land. Cattle have nothing to do with local ecosystems. And if the local ecosystem should try to interact with the cow, let's say a wolf or a coyote or something tries to eat a commodity animal, a livestock animal, well, we all know what happens to those animals. But yeah, we're back to nature. I feel compelled to add an asterisk to that particular section of footage because, as you can see yourselves, nothing's particularly compelling in terms of being lush and green. Well, it was filmed in yet another horrible, horrible drought in California and during a heat wave. You can see that some of the perennial plants, such as trees and shrubs, have managed to maintain a lot of their green. But other plants, even the native ones that are perennial, eventually give way to a drought. And so nothing's looking particularly great right now. But this brings us to another aspect of this whole argument, in that much of the drought-resistant native perennial plants have been choked out and replaced by annual plants that turn into dry fire fuel every year, and those were introduced by animal agriculture. And through their invasive nature, they spread. They are spread intentionally by the people who plant them. They are spread by birds. They are spread in the hooves and the fecal matter of animals that eat them and then walk into new areas. And therefore, you are seeing more and more areas that might have managed to maintain their greenness even in a drought time are instead replaced with dry fire fuel. Yet another problem with this idea of regenerative ranching, using the very animals who are the reason that native perennials were replaced with non-drought resistant plants in the first place. So what's the bottom line? What's the end result? What do these sanctuaries end up having to do? Well, it's the same thing that ranches have to do. They take the waste, they take the compost, and they spread it over the land that has already been destroyed by the same animals that produce the waste in order to make something grow back for them to eat the next year. That's not natural. That's not nature. That is a way of overcoming a problem that only exists because of those animals in the first place. I'm not ripping on animal sanctuaries. Power to anyone who wants to provide some form of mercy or compassion to these animals. The point is that the very existence, the very persistence in continuing to breed and create animals that exist solely for the purpose of being killed by humans to eat something that they don't need to eat, and that is incredibly unsustainable, ends with a problem. It starts as a problem and ends as another problem. Since we're talking about animal sanctuaries and being kind to animals and saving them, I want to address one of the most ridiculous arguments I've heard against not eating meat, and that's that if you don't eat them, then they will all be killed. Just repeat that. If we don't eat them, they will be killed. Now, is this argument coming from the people who raise these animals with the sole intent of killing them to sell their flesh? And who, by the way, do this as soon as the animals are big enough to sell on the market so they can be replaced as quickly as possible with the next round of animals that are being raised just to be killed to sell their flesh? Or is this coming from the people who purchase the flesh of these murdered animals and thus support the endless cycle of continuing to raise animals that exist only to die? The only way to end the death of these cows, if you're going to pretend that you have some sort of concern for their well-being, is to end the process entirely. It's amusing in a sick and twisted way to hear people defend consuming dairy products because they don't want the cows to die, when the baby males that are pulled from their mothers are literally thrown into trash cans or sent straight to slaughter because they don't want those animals drinking their mother's milk. But yeah, thanks for your concern for the animals. Or just the eating meat argument in general, that I have to eat the flesh of this dead animal on my plate, otherwise his friends standing in line at the slaughterhouse will be killed. Because if you don't eat that meat, then all those animals in line to be slaughtered are going to be saved. So back to saving the animals. There are 94 million cows or something of that number in the United States alone right now. If we saved all of them and were to give them space on a sanctuary, that would mean we would have to buy a lot more wild open land and convert that to sanctuary. And as you have seen, that would essentially mean destroying that land. That essentially means taking that land from wild animals and getting rid of wild native habitat. So once again, that doesn't work. You have to stop this endless cycle of producing animals that have no place in a natural ecosystem in the first place. These animals exist for an industry that makes money indulging the selfish appetites of human beings.